The disappearance and murder of Eve Carson. A student mysteriously vanished from her own home in the dead of night, leaving behind no clues, no witnesses, and no explanation. As police launched a desperate search, a grim truth slowly began to emerge. Step by step, investigators uncovered a story that would shock the entire nation. A brilliant beginning, Eve Carson was born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia. From an early age, she stood out as exceptionally bright, driven, and compassionate. In high school, Eve seemed unstoppable. She served as vice president of the student council, volunteered at both a nursing home and a shelter for abused teens, worked as a congressional page, and even assisted in a stem cell research lab, all while maintaining top grades. After graduating with honors, she attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, pursuing a double major in political science and biology. Her academic excellence earned her a prestigious scholarship, and she quickly became one of the most respected student leaders on campus. Eve continued her passion for service, teaching science to elementary school students and volunteering abroad in Ecuador, Cuba, and Egypt. Her intelligence, kindness, and leadership made her one of UNC's most admired students. At just 22 years old, Eve was in her final year of college and already had a job offer waiting for her after graduation. Her future was bright until tragedy struck. The night she disappeared. On the night of March 5, 2008, around 1:30 a.m., Eve's roommates were heading out to a party. They invited her to come along, but she decided to stay home and study. When they returned around 4:30 a.m., something immediately felt wrong. The front door was wide open, the lights were still on, but Eve and her car were gone. It didn't make sense. Why would she leave in the middle of the night? Why leave the door open? They tried calling her, but she didn't answer. Hoping it was nothing serious, they waited. But by morning, Eve was still missing. That's when her friends called the police. A chilling discovery. When investigators heard the details, their blood ran cold. Earlier that same morning, police had discovered the body of an unidentified young woman. They showed Eve's friends a photo of the victim, and their worst fears were confirmed. It was Eve. Around 5 a.m., just hours after she was last seen, a nearby resident had called 911 after hearing gunshots and a scream. Officers arrived to find a young woman's body lying in the street. She had been shot multiple times and there was no identification on her. Now detectives needed to know, how did Eve end up there and who was responsible? The investigation begins. Eve's roommates told police she was last seen at 1:30 a.m. and her computer showed activity until 3:30 a.m., meaning she was still at home 2 hours after they left. Her car, wallet, and credit cards were missing, pointing to a robbery. Medical examiners confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault, ruling that out as a motive. Soon after, police found Eve's car abandoned just a few miles away. It was sent for fingerprint and DNA testing. Meanwhile, detectives traced her phone records. Her last signal came from a tower near the highway outside town, but her phone was never recovered. Then came a crucial breakthrough. Someone had withdrawn $700 from Eve's bank account just 18 minutes after her last computer activity. The ATM was located near a shopping center across town. When police reviewed the surveillance footage, they spotted a man sitting inside Eve's car, using her card at the machine. In the back seat, there appeared to be another person, possibly Eve herself. A trail of transactions. In the days that followed, Eve's card was used at multiple ATMs across the city, but most of those machines had no cameras. Then on March 7th, another attempt was made at a convenience store around 12:30 a.m. This time, the ATM declined the transaction, but the store had a working camera. The footage revealed a different man trying to use the card. Now, investigators believe there were two suspects involved, or that the original killer had passed the card to an accomplice. The police released both surveillance images to the public, hoping someone would recognize them. Calls flooded in, but none led to a breakthrough, until March 12th, when an anonymous caller provided a critical tip. Two suspects, one crime. The caller identified the man in the second video as Dario Atwater, a 21-year-old with a long criminal record, robbery, assault, drug offenses, and weapons charges. Detectives soon discovered that Atwater had close ties to a 17-year-old named Lawrence Levet, who also had a violent history. Police compared Levet's mugshot with the man seen driving Eve's car in the ATM footage. It was a match. Atwater was arrested first and denied involvement. Levet resisted arrest, barricading himself inside his home until SWAT officers forced entry. Both were taken into custody and charged. Cell phone records placed them near Eve's neighborhood the night of the murder, even though they lived in another city. Investigators concluded that the pair had been out looking for someone to rob and spotted Eve studying through her window. They forced her into her car at gunpoint, drove her to several ATMs to withdraw money, and after reaching the withdrawal limit, took her to a quiet area on the outskirts of town, where they executed her. Confession and justice. Given the brutality of the crime, prosecutors quickly moved to announce their intention to seek the death penalty for Dario Atwater, who was the older of the two suspects involved. However, Lawrence Levet, being a minor at the time of the murder, was legally unable to face the death penalty. Instead, he was looking at a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In an effort to strengthen their case and avoid a lengthy trial, the prosecution offered Atwater a deal. If he pled guilty, they would remove the death penalty from consideration. Atwater, realizing the weight of the situation, accepted the deal, and in doing so, provided a detailed confession of the crime. He admitted that on the night of March 5, 2008, he and Levet had gone out with the intention of committing a robbery. After spotting Eve Carson through a window at her home, they decided to break in. Armed with guns, they forced Eve into her own car, planning to use her credit cards to withdraw money. Throughout the harrowing ordeal, Eve begged for her life. She promised them that she wouldn't report them. She simply wanted to be let go and go back home. But Atwater explained they had other plans. As they prepared to end her life, Eve made one final heart-wrenching plea. She asked them to pray with her before they killed her. Despite her show of humanity and vulnerability, Atwater said they refused her request for mercy. Instead of compassion, they coldly shot her multiple times, ending her life in a senseless act of violence. In April 2010, Atwater was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 30 years for the other crimes committed during the robbery. During sentencing, Atwater expressed remorse, apologizing to Eve's family and admitting that he fully deserved the punishment he received. However, Lawrence Levet refused to plead guilty and continued to maintain his innocence. In 2011, Levet stood trial for his role in Eve's murder. Despite his defense attorney's efforts to argue that he had been influenced by Atwater, the overwhelming evidence, including Atwater's confession, pointed to Levet's active involvement in the crime. The jury convicted Levet, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the story didn't end there. In 2013, just 2 years later, a state appeals court overturned Levet's sentence. The decision stemmed from a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that deemed life sentences without the possibility of parole for juveniles to be cruel and unusual punishment in many cases, and therefore unconstitutional. As a result, Levet was granted a new trial and the possibility of a reduced sentence. Despite the new trial, Levet's second conviction was nearly identical to the first. In 2014, he was again sentenced to life in prison, but with the potential for parole at some point in the future, a possibility that had previously been denied. Investigators also suspected Levet's involvement in another similar crime that occurred just months before Eve's murder. In that case, a 29-year-old graduate student had been killed in his apartment, and his credit cards were used at various ATMs, just like in Eve's case. While there were similarities between the two cases, authorities did not find enough concrete evidence to charge Levet in the earlier murder, and the case was eventually closed. A lasting legacy, Eve Carson's death broke hearts across the nation, but it also sparked change. In her memory, North Carolina lawmakers passed tougher penalties and stricter procedures for gang-related crimes. At the University of North Carolina, a scholarship and memorial garden were created in her honor, celebrating her spirit of leadership, service, and compassion. Even in death, Eve continued to inspire. In 2009, one of her close friends, a finalist on American Idol, dedicated his performance to her, saying Eve's memory gave him the courage to pursue his dreams. Eve Carson's story remains a haunting reminder of how one act of violence can shatter countless lives, and how one extraordinary young woman's light continues to shine long after she's gone. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. We post true crime stories every night. Until next time, stay sharp and stay vigilant.